Welcome to another episode of the Filmosophers Movie Talk Show. I'm Chris Bush.
And I am, allegedly, Dean Slider.
Rumor has it. On today's episode of Movie Picks, Dean and I will be talking about music documentaries. And
Whee!
Dean, if you're ready, take it away.
I'm ready. I was born ready. This year, as it happens, there are several documentaries about pop music, various aspects and artists, pop artists, that have been nominated for Emmys, various Emmys in the documentary categories. And I want to talk about actually four of them today. And Chris, I'm sure you'll help me bat those around. They are the Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? Framing Britney Spears, Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry, and the most succinctly and elegantly titled of them all, Tina. What I found really interesting watching the four of these more or less back to back is the different experiences that these artists had with essentially becoming gods. In this country, we don't have God consensus gods the way older civilizations did. We don't have kings and queens, so we have to create them out of our pop culture. And people who get into those positions because they happen to be talented at singing and maybe dancing and maybe being very good looking, find themselves rising to this kind of level of divinity, really, where they represent something very deep and very important to their public. And that's a powerful thing, and it's a tricky thing. So you see, for example, in the Tina Turner film, and let me just say, Tina Turner's awesome. I mean, I'm sorry, she is so fabulous, so fabulously talented, and she had nothing going for her. We see how she was abandoned by both parents as a child, taken under the wing of Ike Turner, who was completely abusive from the get-go. She, because she was so fiercely talented and fiercely intelligent and fiercely determined to take control of her career, she made it work. She made it work. The other thing she has going for her is, at a certain point, she's got a spiritual dimension to her life. She's introduced to a form of Buddhism, Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism. A lot of people are familiar with that. That's the one where you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's not particularly my path of practice. People often are familiar with it as something that, you're chanting to get stuff, and it can seem like a very crude approach to spirituality. Interestingly enough, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, my recollection, and this is again kind of almost like cultural snobism. Yes. My recollection about this going back 30, 40 years, 50 years was that it was good for getting parking spaces. Chanting that.
Yeah,
in the Chochu mantra.
A lot of people say that. I've had friends over the years who've practiced Nichiren Buddhism, and generally they wind up saying something like, yeah, at first I chanted for a nice car and a pretty girlfriend, and after that after a while I was just chanting for world peace, and after a while I was just chanting. And when I heard it put that way, I realized this is not so different from many other spiritual paths. A lot of Christians will start there praying for stuff, and then they're praying for, protect my family and so forth. And if things fall right, after a while, you're just praying, you're just communing with the Godhead. So, in any case, Tina, through her Buddhist practice, finds the inner strength to break away from the abusive Ike, go out on her own. The other very interesting thing is that she figured out how to work the social media of the time. And the key element of social media at that time was People magazine. And she gave an interview in People magazine where she talked about the abuse, and she became this just heroine for millions of people. And it's so interesting to see in the film the fans, many of them women, many of them men, often gay men, telling Tina. And a thing that you hear actually also about Britney and also about Billie Eilish, you hear variations of, "You gave me the courage to be myself."
Mm.
Right.
Well, I remember from the Tina documentary, after leaving Mike, and she was, she had little children. She did not have any certainty of a second act in her career.
Mm-hmm.
She met a man who later managed her, I think, and later became her husband many years later, who believed in her. And it was not a given. It was really, like you say, fierce determination. And she got a couple of breaks with some great songs like Private Dancer and What's Love Got to Do with It.
Yep.
That she was selling out stadiums.
Yeah.
In her 40s.
And that was, yes, who at 50. By the way, those were two different men. One was she found the right manager, and then eventually she finds the husband.
Okay.
But yes, those two people who got her and saw what really, deeply what she was about. And she had the dream, and you hear about that in the film from early on. What do you want to do? I want to sell out stadiums like the Rolling Stones. And she did at the age of, a woman at the age of 50. By the way, through the entire film, there's no mention of her legs.
Mm.
Oh, the owner of the best gams in the business, not even mentioned, because you don't have to. The Bee Gees film, I never was a big Bee Gees fan, but I must say, watching the film, I watched it a couple of times, I sort of got, oh, these guys were brilliant songwriters. They were excellent performers. One thing that I find so fascinating, and another pop musician, one of the talking heads in the film, I forget who it is, discusses this, which is when you have siblings singing, there's a thing that's possible because of the similarity in the physical structure, not only the emotional closeness, you've grown up together, but you've got this same DNA, you've got you've got this very similar and therefore resonant structure in your face and your larynx and all that. So you can get harmonies out of siblings. Think of the Everly Brothers, right? The second of whom just died a few days ago, by the way. It was incredible, and the same thing with the Bee Gees. The other musician in the film says, you can buy a Stratocaster guitar and you can buy a so and so synthesizer. That those sibling voices, that's an instrument you can't buy. And the dynamic between the brothers is so interesting that, what all these people need to deal with being a god, you need to have some kind of, and not to deal with being a god and not have it destroy you, is you've got to have something to fall back on. For Tina, who did not have family, essentially, it wound up being her spiritual practice. For the Bee Gees, it was the fact that they were brothers. Similar thing with the Beatles, although they were not literally brothers. They were all guys in need of brothers, and they kind of became brothers. And they talk about that in their documentaries. Ringo in particular said, "I never had brothers. These became my band of brothers." And The only other one people in the world who understood what the Beatles were going through would be the other three Beatles. So the Bee Gees, I have to say, I can't get To Love Somebody out of my head. That has been that thing's been echoing for days now, and I've been listening to all the cover versions of it, listening to Nina Simone. Boy, look up, y'all, on YouTube, Nina Simone live at the Montreux Jazz Festival doing To Love Somebody. And, with the first measure, she had me choked up.
Mm. Well, I also saw the Bee Gees documentary. I thought it was terrific. I was not a super big fan. I was aware of their music. It always had kind of the, again, not to be a little introduce snobbery, but they always had that. They were always a little bit. They had that sense of being, they were pop. They were, of the moment, and particularly during their disco time. But they were remarkable. They continuously reinvented themselves from the 60s through the psychedelic era, and of course in the 70s when they did the soundtrack for Saturday Night Fever and a string of hits from that. I mean, a remarkable best-selling album and a string of hits, and they had hits through every decade.
Yeah,
they wrote songs that were hits.
Yeah,
Barry, Maurice, Robin, and then little brother Andy later on joining them. And it is quite a saga, knowing that there's that just the sibling karma and history that they share. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Right. And the jealousies they go through. The most poignant line in the film is near the end when Barry, who is now the only surviving member of the brothers Gibb. By the way, the one thing that's never mentioned in that film is where the name Bee Gees came from. That BG stands for Brothers Gibb.
It's not mentioned?
It's not mentioned. It's not mentioned. Come on.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And also, by the way, Barry in his young years was incredibly beautiful. Did you notice some of those shots? You go, oh my God, this is the handsomest man I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But you see him reminiscing at the end of his life, saying, for some reason I'm the last one. And he says, it's interesting the way he says it. He says to the camera, what I wanted to say earlier. And it's not explained why that's the introduction of the sentence. My guess is because he tried to say it earlier, but he choked up. And he says, what I wanted to say earlier was I would trade all those hits to have my brothers back. Okay, moving on. Framing Britney Spears, a documentary from the New York Times, interestingly enough. And the sort of MacGuffin in this one is the Free Britney movement, the uprising of her fans to end her father's legal conservatorship, which there's a good case for the idea that her father had confused the role of protecting her with exploiting her. And as you all may be aware, that after the film was completed just a couple of weeks ago, that was settled in court or determined rather in court, and the conservatorship has in fact been ended or taken away from her father. In the case of Britney, and what I got from it was, okay, here's this incredibly talented young girl from tiny little town in Louisiana who was, again, determined, but she did not have the family to support her. She did not have the um, the incredible intelligence of a Tina Turner, and she's a little bit later in the social media era and trying to navigate how to handle it. She's still, a topic and a victim of People magazine and of the tabloids. The most poignant part of, and really infuriating part of this film for me was seeing the dynamic with the paparazzi. And there's one paparazzo in particular who was the one who had the confrontation with her after she shaved her head. He was the only guy there, and she wound up attacking his vehicle with an umbrella. And of course, that just fed the thing, and he got the photos of her, which, then with a big headline meltdown went on the covers of the tabloids. And he's interviewed on camera. And this guy is he comes off as such an infuriating hypocrite, saying, well, Britney never told us that she wanted to be left alone. She never gave us a sign that she wanted to be left alone. Yeah, guy, how about when she was beating up your truck with an umbrella? Any kind of hint there for you?
Well, that took some chutzpah to go in front of the camera to do that.
Yeah, or just some complete lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
The Billie, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, but I haven't seen that one, and I'm not particularly knowledgeable about Britney Spears or her career or music. Is it good filmmaking? Is it worth seeing?
Yeah,
for the story that's told.
Yes, it's well done. It's worth seeing for the story that's told. I mean, to me, Britney is of these four acts we're talking about is, the least interesting artistically. She coming out in 90s pop, which to me is a, completely uninteresting musical period. But again, we see the evolution of social media. She becomes an Instagram phenomenon. She becomes a topic of, their whole, YouTube channels, like what we're doing here, that are devoted to her. And we see the people that run those talking about her. And so it just becomes like a constant struggle. Am I going to, it's like riding a tiger. Am I going to be able to keep riding this tiger or be devoured by it? And she's largely devoured by it. So it's, that is interesting to see. The last one, Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry. It's beautifully done. Have you seen it, Chris?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, yeah. It's just beautifully done. This is directed by R.J. Cutler, who is a very prolific documentarian. My wife did some work with him years ago. And he really just, the access that he got, just essentially camping out in the house. And, Billie Eilish is this phenomenon that basically her whole thing was brewed in her house with her brother. She's got this incredible family support, which you see how the mother's involved, how the father's involved. Most of all, her older brother, Phineas, who they've been making music together since they were kids. And he's her producer, and they produce these songs in their bedrooms. And we see the whole phenomenon of they send a tape to our local station here in Santa Monica, KCRW, and we see them celebrating when it first starts to be played. And they go from there within, I think, a year to being this huge worldwide phenomenon, selling millions of records, going, multi-platinum in multiple countries. And again, Billie Eilish she is a unique talent. She's got stuff that goes on in her voice. She has this just soul-bearing quality, this rawness of soul that is really up there, I think, with a Nina Simone or a Billie Holiday.
Mm.
And and again, she's incredibly smart, and she comes a little bit later in the social media era and pretty much figures out how to work it. Pretty much to not be a victim the way Britney Spears was. Interestingly, one of the most interesting things that happens is we find out that she tells us that as a little girl, she was madly in love with Justin Bieber. And how she remembers crying because she's sure that she will never be able to love a boyfriend or a husband as much as she loves Justin Bieber. Okay. And of course, Justin was someone who started as a 16-year-old kid in Canada, uploading songs to YouTube, becomes this huge phenomenon, and largely crashes and burns, largely is destroyed by his pop stardom. And then, I don't want to tell too much stuff about it, but he comes into the picture a little bit when she rises to her success.
Mm.
But it's a beautifully made film, and she is so interesting, and mainly the way that she, I think, avoids the fate of a Britney is that she has no secrets. Is that because all her songwriting and her singing is all, bearing of soul, there's nothing else for anyone to find out.
Mm.
There's nothing to pry into. And also, she has the advantage that we're later on in the evolution of social media, where the paparazzi have essentially been replaced by everyone's got a cell phone. So you see, wherever she goes, she's mobbed by her fans. They're all taking pictures. That's, devalued the old paparazzi material. Her life's an open book. Done.
Interesting. Interesting. By the way, we're talking about the selfies. Have you seen this any of this new series with Steve Martin and Martin Short?
No, what is it?
Only Murders in the Building. It's a Hulu series. I would maybe think of it. Steve Martin is a ex-TV actor. He had a series many years ago, and people will still recognize him on the street. And he's walking down the New York street. A couple recognizes him, and they start talking a little bit. He says, "You'd like a picture, wouldn't you?" And they say, "Yeah." So they hand them their camera and they pose without him in the picture. They ask him to take the picture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was cute. Steve Martin co-wrote it. I've only seen a few of the episodes, but cute so far. But I digress.
Yes.
So the 4 films, once again, just for the Filmosophers audience to note down and put on their watch list if they haven't already seen them.
Okay, so the Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, Framing Britney Spears, Tina, and Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry.
The couple of music documentaries I thought to mention are both related to Motown and the Motown phenomenon, which is quite a phenomenon. Started in, I think, 1958 by impresario, entrepreneur Berry Gordy in a little house in Detroit. Hitsville, USA was launched. And the 2 films, one is called Standing in the Shadows of Motown, came out in 2002. It really, its emphasis is on the backup band that was the Motown house band, known as the Funk Brothers, which included James Jamerson, Benny Benjamin, Richard Allen, and others. And great. It's kind of through a combination of archival performances, interviews, and actually some reenactments of some of the songs by contemporary performers, which is okay, not that great. But the archival stuff, the interviews, just fantastic. And to get to know who these characters and the genesis of some of these classic songs and classic song riffs is really just so delectable. That's Standing in the Shadows of Motown. The other one that's about Motown is called Hitsville, The Making of Motown. And this came out 2 years ago in 2019. And in this movie, it's also interviews and archival footage, but your movie guides are Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson, who still maintain a friendship, 60 years later. And I think Smokey and the Miracles were among the first acts that Berry signed, but later to include the Four Tops, the Temptations, Mary Wells, Diana Ross and the Supremes, who started out as the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Jackson 5. So it's just this incredible legacy of musical talent that got their start and launched their careers under the Motown label, as well as some of the wonderful songwriting teams who were they were kind of a house under Berry Gordy's auspices as well as house writers. And that's Hitsville, The Making of Motown. Two great music documentaries I recommend if you haven't seen them already. Whether you're a Motown fan or not, really great movie making and just very enjoyable. So,
Chris, I want to mention a little place where one of my movies and your movies today intersect. A little fact that I was not aware of that I learned from the Bee Gees documentary was that they wrote To Love Somebody for Otis Redding. But Otis never recorded it because he was killed in the plane crash. So then they recorded it themselves. But it's so interesting to listen to that song and imagine Otis singing, and you can totally hear it.
Totally hear it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, totally hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
You can totally hear it, and you can hear his funky horn section behind him. You can the whole thing. It's so you can run that track in your head.
That's a good one. Okay, anything more, Dean?
Nothing. I think we're done here.
We're good. I think we're good.
We'll
do more music documentaries down the road because there are more we've seen that are really worth recommending. Yep. Okay, well, for the Filmosophers, that's it for this episode of Movie Picks, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Filmosophers Movie Talk Show. Please subscribe to stay up to date on our newest episodes.